between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. We've got the Green Party candidate, Jill Stein, joining us here in studio. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Really great to be with you.
And so you were not on the main stage last night, neither you nor Gary Johnson, the Libertarian Party candidate. You need 15% in polls in order to meet that threshold as set by the Presidential Debate Commission. But you hosted your own event. Can you tell people a little bit about that if they didn't see it?
Yeah, and first let me just say that the Commission on Presidential Debates is, in the words of League of Women Voters, a fraud being perpetrated on the American public. This is basically the Democratic and Republican parties establishing a private corporation that took charge of the debates for the purpose of eliminating voices of political opposition. That is two-party tyranny. That is not democracy. The American people are clamoring for an open debate because the two mainstream candidates are the most disliked and untrusted in our history. 75%, over that, of people want to have an inclusive debate. So we forced our way in.
Do you think that 15% is fair, though? You know, the fact that they have created that threshold?
Well, they've created that threshold in a very rigged playing field, whereby Donald Trump had $4 billion worth of free primetime media. Hillary Clinton had $2 billion. Over 70% of voters don't even know my name or who I am. So how exactly, it's a catch-22. Unless you are part of this rigged system, it's very hard to break in. So we're saying, let's use a common sense rule. If a candidate is on the ballot in enough states that they could actually win, have a numerical opportunity to win, voters deserve to know who their choices are. That doesn't mean 20 candidates. There would be 4 candidates. That means opening it up beyond these 2 candidates that are so disliked and untrusted. It's an obvious common sense thing to do.
Do you feel like, I think back to the primary debates, right, when you have so many people. At one point there was, 10 or 11 people on one stage, and that's crazy because you never get to anything. Last night we had 2 people on the stage, hour and a half long debate or slightly over. And do you feel like we really got to any substance? Right? Lester Holt would set it up and ask a question and say, you have 2 minutes to speak on the issue, go. Do you feel like that's a good format?
Well, whether it's the format or whether it was the, the exclusion of opposition voices, debates are an opportunity for the American people to really hear the issues discussed and for the candidates to be held accountable for their views and for their track records. We did not hear about, Hillary Clinton's track record in Libya, in Iran, where she wants to go in Syria, which is basically an air war with Russia by starting a no-fly zone. Her track record of, what she's done with the economy and on banks. And likewise, it's hard for Clinton and Trump to really talk about issues outside of this very narrow spectrum. Both of them are militarists. Both of them want to beef up the military, which is already costing us more than half of our discretionary budget. Nearly half of your income taxes are paying for this bloated and dangerous military budget. And what do we have for it? Failed states, mass refugee migrations, worse terrorist threats, no end in sight. The whole policy needs to be challenged, but that won't happen from inside the system. And both Hillary and Donald are inside of that system. They may be very different on a lot of social issues and different personalities and temperaments, but we're really not seeing a challenge to this economy that's dominated by financialization and bankers.
Well, let me ask you this. Hillary Clinton, obviously there's a lot to criticize, especially if you look at foreign policy, and Donald Trump will point back to her vote for the Iraq War, but then won't go into the nuance about perhaps supporting an intervention in Libya, what that has done, as well as the Iraq War to destabilize the Middle East, what it means when we try to, bring in regime change to other places without an after plan or a long-term game. But how do you have substance when the other person, Donald Trump, is making comments like, you've been fighting ISIS as long as you've been alive? Which is something that he said to Hillary Clinton, which the Islamic State hasn't even been around. I mean, how do you make sense and try to have an actual dialogue with an opponent like that?
Yeah, well, I think you don't, and you don't have to have a dialogue. You can still speak truth. You can still critique Donald Trump's record, and Hillary Clinton alluded to that a little bit, but there's incredible just chaos and dirt in Donald Trump's record. his business associations, for example, which Newsweek did this investigative report about. You know, they're just horrific. It looks like every mafioso and big-time crook on the planet is part of Donald Trump's business associates. So, you know, he needs to be critiqued. It's hard for Hillary Clinton to call for disclosure when she herself, you know, has so much to hide. So the two of them were just kind of engaged in mudslinging and which one is the greater corporate crook. There needs to be someone in this debate who is not a corporate crook, who's not taking money from corporations, who doesn't have a super PAC, who is neither a billionaire nor supported by billionaires, who can critique this billionaire economy that's throwing everyday people on the bus, can really put the truth on the table. You know, how the American people are struggling in an economy where 22 billionaires have as much as half of the American public altogether, where the jobs that have come back are low-wage and part-time. Donald Trump pretends to oppose the Trans-Pacific Partnership and NAFTA, but he himself is a big advocate for actually offshoring jobs, and he did so with his own product line. Everything that he sells is made outside of the United States. So he needs to be called on his hypocrisy, but that's hard for Hillary to do because she herself also flip-flops. You know, they need to be challenged across the board, not just a question of Obamacare versus privatized medicine. It's all being privatized, and even under Obamacare, 1 out of every 3 Americans cannot afford it. We need an improved Medicare for all system. Neither one of them is going to stand up for that. Neither one of them will stand up for abolishing student debt and bailing out the students the way Democrats and Republicans bailed out the crooks on Wall Street. It's time to bail out the students. So they won't get down to the real solutions. They won't talk about the crisis of climate change and what exactly we need to do, because they're clueless. And while Donald Trump doesn't admit to climate change, he supports coal. In reality, fracking is as bad as coal. Coal is going to self-destruct. Fracking is not. And Hillary Clinton has been,
fracking
she's been
Hillary
spreading
Clinton
fracking around the
and
world.
by Barack Obama.
They all need to be called on it. And I encourage people to go to our website, Jill2016.com, and join our campaign for open debates. A poll came out yesterday, I believe, that showed that something like 54% of millennials are actually considering voting for third parties. And when you have the kinds of, nonsense and offensive idiocy on a debate, how much of the debate did they talk about the birther issue? I mean, come on, is that really what we need to be talking about? When you have that going on in our debates,
but
that is pushing people into our camp.
When it comes to the birther issue, right, Donald Trump, who now has admitted that he doesn't believe that Barack Obama was born in another country, still shows no signs of remorse for making that an issue, nor does he acknowledge that it is race-based at its very foundation, and instead just says, well, listen, I got results. I actually got him to go out there and display the birth certificate. So when you watch, Hillary Clinton, absolutely flawed candidate. Donald Trump, though, can you say that there is an equivalency there? I would, or do you think that Donald Trump is worse, is scarier for the United States? Because when I was watching that last night, not only him interrupting every second, but claiming that he has a good temperament, I think it's terrifying to think that a man like that could have so much power.
It absolutely is. Donald Trump is a person, he's a bully, a hate monger, and a fear monger, and you would not want him as your next door neighbor. Just imagine, what a horrible thing to have a Trump as your neighbor, let alone as your president. However, Hillary Clinton, although she's a much more gracious personality, compared to Donald Trump at least, her track record is extremely alarming. And it's not okay to be barring Muslims like Donald Trump calls for, but it's not okay to be bombing Muslims either. And 1 million people died in Iraq alone in that war. Libya is an absolute disaster. Hillary wants to charge headlong into an air war, declaring a no-fly zone over Syria, which means we're at war with Russia on nuclear armed power. So that won't, personally, I'm not going to sleep well at night with either of them in office. As Bernie Sanders himself said, the only solution to a Donald Trump, and it's not just Trump, it's right-wing extremism. The solution to that is not more of this centrism delivered by the Clintons, in fact, and the Democratic Party. NAFTA.
Yeah. But
NAFTA
Bernie Sanders, to be fair, has endorsed Hillary Clinton.
Well, but to be fair, Bernie also said it's a movement and not a man, and many of his supporters, his most enthusiastic and passionate supporters, are not following him down that road. Because it's true. Putting another Clinton in the White House, what did we get? We got NAFTA, we got Wall Street deregulation, which created the economic misery that has in turn produced this surge of right-wing extremism. So another Clinton is not the solution. There is no solution here except for what Bernie said, which is actually moving forward determinedly with a truly progressive and radical policies that create a just economy that address the concerns of people who are flocking to Trump's side.
I want to read a couple comments here. First one from Holly Rockford. She says, "I care to have an alternative to the two-party system. Thank you, Jill Stein, for your perseverance." And then Susan Albright Steele says, "You need to drop out of the race, or we the people will suffer, because all you are doing is taking votes away from both candidates. There's no way that you can win this presidential race. If we elect the wrong person this time, our country is done. Drop out." What do you say?
So, what I would say to that is that politicians do not have a new form of entitlement. Simply because they're part of the political establishment, they are not entitled to our votes. They have to earn our votes. They don't own them. They have to earn them, and these two candidates have not earned our votes. The majority of voters, in the largest numbers ever, are saying they do not trust and they do not like these candidates. Even their own supporters predominantly don't like them, but are in large majorities voting against the other candidate. So how about we give people another choice? We could see something really different happen. For example, there are 43 million young people locked into predatory student loan debt right now. I'm the only candidate who will bail out the students like the Democrats and Republicans bailed out Wall Street. It's about time to bail out the victims of Wall Street. 43 million people in debt is actually a winning plurality of the vote. If that word got out, if the curtain came up on who our choices actually are, we could see not a splitting of the vote, but a flipping of the vote. The bottom line.
But at the moment, you are polling around 1%.
Because
and then when poll, and obviously there's a margin of error there, and you
they
take
don't
every
count
poll with a grain of salt.
And they don't count so-called unlikely voters, which are millennials
when looked
and
at
people of
national
color.
polls too that include yourself and Gary Johnson with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, you do take some votes away from her. But
well,
maybe
and from Donald Trump as well.
But more from Hillary Clinton. So are you going to be okay with people essentially blaming you for Donald Trump if he is elected president?
The solution to a wounded democracy is not less democracy. Are people going to say we should only have a Democrat and a Republican running in a presidential race? Those are our official parties, and all other candidates shall be silenced? No, that's not the solution. The solution is to end fear-based voting. There's a simple solution here called ranked choice voting. It's already used in cities across the country and in countries around the world. It lets you rank your choice, and it provides the assurance that if your first candidate loses, your vote is automatically reassigned to your second choice. The state of Maine is actually running that as a voter referendum because it's working so well in their cities. Now they're running it statewide. We could, on an emergency basis, if everybody who's freaked out about what to do with their vote, if everybody mobbed our legislators' offices right now, filled them with hundreds and thousands of people, we could demand that they pass, on an emergency basis, ranked choice voting in any state to eliminate this possibility of an unintended consequence.
This I think goes to the question that a lot of people ask is why not then does the Green Party take those ideas and try to put them into
that's actually
action,
what we've been
right?
doing.
Yeah, and
that's
in
what
local
we've been
office
doing
everywhere
and
instead of going for something like the presidency and
actually we already are in local
office,
office, but you don't hear about that because the media doesn't cover it. The
right,
only time we get covered is at the national level.
But the attention that the Green Party gets now is for yourself, right? And
I bring it to local candidates as well who improve in the polls. It's like when the socialist candidate ran, Eugene V. Debs. He helped initiate, he ushered in an era where socialists and progressives got elected to all levels of local government because he ran continually. He even ran in jail because he was a war resistor. He ran continually for president and helped lift up that agenda, which moved us forward, gave us Social Security, gave us the gave us the New Deal, gave us child labor laws, and so on. The Democrats could pass, in the blink of an eye, ranked choice voting. We actually proposed it together with a progressive Democrat in my home state in Massachusetts the first time I ran for governor. And guess what? Over 16 years, they still won't let it out of committee. They rely on fear. Why do they rely on fear? Is because they're not really on your side, because they take their marching orders from the big money. So the fact that they rely on fear is enough to lose them the right of your vote. They do not deserve your vote if they cannot earn it, if they can only intimidate you into voting for them because somebody else is worse. It is a race to the bottom. Look at where we're going with the greater and the lesser evil. It's not just this election. It's election after election. Through this fear-based voting system, we keep marching to the right, and both parties become more corporatist, more militarist, and more imperialist. The clock is ticking. This is a Hail Mary moment. We're not only deciding what kind of a world we're going to have, but whether we're going to have a world or not going forward.
Yeah.
On climate,
but
on
again,
the
that goes
expanding
back.
wars,
Listen,
on nuclear weapons.
I agree with you, right?
They're
I
not
think
going to
so
fix
many
it.
of your policies are right, but you didn't answer my question that a lot of people feel that if Donald Trump is elected president, that is the end of
So
days
get
for the
to your
United States. So how are
legislator's
you going to
office.
feel if he wins, and if you played a considerable role?
Well,
in
and
that?
how will you feel if Hillary Clinton wins and then we're in a nuclear war with Russia? And that could readily happen. Hillary Clinton has been beating the war drum with Russia, with
the
NATO
Democrats have been
exercises.
doing it to an embarrassing and scary degree.
Exactly.
Right.
So
But
the
you didn't
point
answer my
here-
question.
Well, I will feel terrible if Donald gets elected, and I will feel terrible if Hillary gets elected. But fortunately, we live in a democracy, and if we are ever going to overcome this race to the bottom between the two militarist, corporatist, imperialist parties, we have to put our feet down and we have to build. And anybody who is freaked out at the possibility of Donald Trump, get 100 friends out, because there are a lot of freaked out people. Get 100 friends and flood your legislator's office, flood all the legislators' offices in your state, and get ranked choice voting passed on an emergency basis for this election. And then keep pushing on it, because the only way we are going to break out of fear-based voting, which will continue to drive us over the cliff, is if we pass that voting reform, which we could pass right now if we just blow past the Democrats.
One thing that you definitely have and have inherited in a certain way from Bernie Sanders too is the support of a lot of young people and young voters, millennials, whatever you want to call them, and that's kind of the nut that everyone is always trying to crack, right? I mean, changing demographics mean that any candidate has to pursue a variety, a much wider variety than they used to of different voting groups and blocks. But what is it that you are hearing specifically from young people that you feel isn't being tapped into elsewhere or by others?
Well,
what are you learning about this kind of millennial generation that everyone wants to figure out?
The millennial generation is the disappeared generation, because they are very busy working 2 and 3 part-time, low-wage jobs to try to keep their head above water, a roof over their heads, and to pay back their predatory student loans. So we are the only campaign that is saying it's time to bail out the students like we bailed out the crooks on Wall Street. We can do it for a tiny fraction of what it costs to bail out Wall Street, and there are plenty of ways that we can raise that money. Tax Wall Street, for example, and we'll have all the money we need to bail out the students. We're the only campaign that is now calling for free public higher education, which is outrageous that we don't have when you think about it, because public higher education actually pays for itself. For every dollar we put in, we actually get back $7 in return from increased revenues and improved public benefits. So there are 2 really critical things. Ending the climate crisis, because now the best science done by Jim Hansen, who hasn't been wrong yet, the foremost climate scientist, tells us that as soon as 2050, we could be looking at 9, 10, and even more feet of sea level rise, which is basically curtains for civilization as we know it. We can't wait around another 4 or 8 years to start moving on this. We need an emergency program right now that creates jobs on an emergency basis, which is great for millennials because they need some good jobs instead of these part-time and temporary jobs. This Green New Deal achieves 100% clean renewable energy by 2030.
Well, part of the problem there, and we'll actually be talking about this later today in another interview too, is the issue that, and less so with young people. I think young people are not allergic to government, but so many of those who are disenchanted, disappointed in the federal government, who are conservative, maybe are Donald Trump supporters because they don't like any establishment candidates as they see it either. They hate politicians. They hate anything that is associated with the government. So when you talk about the need to address things immediately, like climate change or like our healthcare crisis in this country, the solution you're using is a government-based one, right? So how do you get those people on your side?
In my experience, the minute you talk about student debt and canceling it, they are in, because it's not hypothetical, it's not remote. It's them. They don't have a future now, and they are pissed off for very good reason. And for them to know that we have the ability to cancel that debt right now, the same way it was done for Wall Street. And there are many different ways it can be done, but the simplest is to just tax Wall Street or, raise the inheritance tax, an aristocracy tax that Barack Obama made permanent after George Bush created the tax cuts for the wealthy. Barack Obama, our great progressive president, made these tax cuts for the wealthy permanent. So there are many ways we can do that. That's not the issue. We need to have people in the driver's seat. Government's been given a terrible name.
I mean, the reason,
well, in my
people don't want to believe in science. When it comes to climate change, it is almost like an allergy or denial. They don't want anything to do with it.
Well, when you go on campuses now, I mean, we are being mobbed. When we go on campuses. Yesterday, when I was walking around Hofstra, we were invited to do a whole bunch of interviews. Just by walking around on campus, we came to the attention of the authorities, the campus security, who actually escorted us off because we were being mobbed by students who were following us and congregating and cheering wildly. If you look at the interviews, we were surrounded by students. And we hadn't done any organizing on Hofstra to let people know. They weren't expecting us, but word got out as I was just walking around. People recognized me. So it is hype. It is totally hype that young people are swinging conservative. They're actually swinging socialist right now.
Well, I was speaking less about young people and more about, young people. You have their support.
We actually do.
Yeah, I'm speaking about
even
the other
without
people, the rest of the population that still needs to in some way be won over.
Well, but they are, they're a victim of their own fears, and young people are always the ones to lead the charge. So by their standing up with a real politics of courage and a politics of integrity, they're leading the way on everything. They can also lead the way on a voter revolt, which is waiting to happen.
And you actually have to vote. Don't forget. You also have to register, and you have to make sure that you go out and vote too. Another topic, incredibly important, we want to talk about today is that it is National Gay Men's HIV and AIDS Awareness Day. And I'm so sorry, somebody's calling me right now. That's the problem. I got my phone up here so I can check the comments. And let's talk about the importance of that and why that's something that you want to talk about with us today.
Yes. So, it's really important to recognize this day. It is all about HIV and AIDS awareness and what that community and all of us can do to, to ensure that people have the benefit of testing. They have the benefit of prevention, because there's good medication right now that can be used prophylactically to prevent transmission, so that there is good treatment. We also have to change our healthcare system so that treatment is fully covered. Prevention should be covered as well. And we need to ensure that people who are living with HIV and AIDS have the supports that they need, and that includes housing, that includes jobs, and again, that especially includes health care and protection from discrimination.
And it's unfortunately become an issue that I think a lot of people block out and think is not an American problem anymore, right? When we talk about HIV and AIDS, very much so it is. In some of our biggest cities, you look at Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, for example, and we have huge numbers there. So how do we make it a part of the public consciousness again?
I think we need to have a healthcare system and a political system that is working for people and not for profits. We need to have a pharmaceutical system and a system of care which is based on delivering for people and not for profits. We really need a transformation of our political system, which continues to throw people under the bus. And it goes, across the board. We need a political system which is bringing out the best in us and bringing us to a more caring and community-based place where the most vulnerable among us are receiving the support and the care that they need.
And got another comment here. This one comes from Genevieve Freeman Massa. It says, is Jill equipped with the political knowledge, skills, and experience to become President of the United States? That is for the voters to decide. And our commenters are debating that amongst themselves in the well there, too.
Yeah.
I want to give you a chance here, too, to just comment on there's two issues, kind of, stories that are out there that people negatively like to bring up about you, and that's your position on vaccinations and a recent comment, too, about Wi-Fi and it being in schools and whether or not that has a negative impact and effect on children and their brains and their development. So let us hear it.
This is the birther issue of 2016, the idea that I, as a medical doctor, Harvard trained, am anti-science. First of all, I support vaccinations as a fundamental pillar of public health, so that's just that's like somebody's imagination here. That's a disinformation campaign. Probably dates back to when I was part of a public health movement to get the mercury out of vaccines, which actually succeeded. So it's important when we make improvements that we not let corporations in the pharmaceutical industry stand in the way. That applies across the board to all of our regulatory agencies, in fact, so that whether it's the EPA or the Drug Enforcement Agency or the FDA, we need to be sure that special interests are not interfering with proper use of science. So, for example, during the Vioxx crisis, where the FDA sat on data for 5 years and 140,000 cases of serious heart disease developed because the FDA wouldn't let the information out. Why was that? Because the influence, the undue influence, the rotating, the revolving door between industry and our regulatory agencies and the money in politics. So we say get the money out of politics, stop the revolving door, ensure that people can trust our regulatory agencies. But in terms of vaccines, yes, I support them, and I always have. That's nothing but rumor. About Wi-Fi, science has actually raised this question about whether Wi-Fi exposure might be problematic for very young children. I don't know the answer to that question, but I don't think we should stand in the way of finding out.
The World Health Organization for now says no.
Well, on the other hand, but the NIH just did a study that raised very serious questions, and many countries in Europe actually now protect young children from Wi-Fi exposure, meaning in schools, that they're not subjected to it 24/7, including during an 8-hour school day, that they don't use Wi-Fi in the classroom for very young children. Now, why are they doing that? They're doing that because there is data out there which is not definitive, but it raises red flags. So I'm not saying, that it's time to do anything about this, except let the science go forward. Don't stand in the way of science. There was a time when the germ theory was ridiculed, and in fact, the medical profession rejected the idea that physicians should be washing their hands before surgery and after surgery. That was considered an absolutely outrageous idea.
Really
and
glad
science,
that's not the case
science
anymore.
showed eventually sometimes you have to actually look at new science and pay attention to it. That's what we need to do so we can serve the American people. And in terms of like the experience I bring, I do not bring Donald Trump's experience of abusing workers, of offshoring his jobs, of mistreating and cheating on students in the Trump University, for example. And I do not bring Hillary Clinton's experience taking money from the contributors to the Clinton Foundation and then providing special deals, or taking money from the big banks and not revealing what she has basically said to them behind closed doors, and essentially being sponsored by predatory banks, fossil fuel giants, and war profiteers. I'm the only candidate in the presidential election that doesn't take money from lobbyists, from corporate interests, and does not have a super PAC. So I am the only candidate who is qualified to actually represent the American people without conflicts of interest. My experience is actually at the level of communities, building coalitions to actually get things done. Coalitions among public health and labor and communities of color. For example, getting money out of politics. In my home state of Massachusetts, we got the money out by passing campaign finance reform, but the Democrats in the legislature, with all their experience inside of our corrupted two-party system, they repealed public financing for elections so that they could maintain their stranglehold on our political system. That's when I became convinced that real change will come outside of the sold-out two political parties.
Let's not forget that Barack Obama actually played a large role in kind of ending the practice of anyone really using or having publicly financed campaigns. His first campaign, they raised a record amount of money on the internet, and everything changed. And that was, before Citizens United. I want to bring in another question here from one of our viewers. Jeannie Frontera Moak says, as a veteran family, how do you propose making the system better for disabled veterans and their families? This is an important issue for me and many voters of men and women who sacrificed for this country, which is not taking care of them now in areas like benefits, healthcare, alternative medicine, etc.
All of the above. It is a national scandal and disgrace how our veterans who put themselves in harm's way, and many of whom made the ultimate sacrifice, others sacrificed their health and their future, being seriously wounded and maimed in this conflict. So we need to do right by our veterans. We need to ensure that they have full health coverage, because right now they have rather skimpy health coverage, which really limits their supports, even for very seriously injured and wounded veterans who are living with enormous disabilities. They need to have full coverage and chronic coverage, and they need to have support. That means in terms of housing, it means job training, and it also means jobs. We need to treat our veterans with the respect that they deserve, and we also need to stop needlessly putting our men and women, our servicemen and women, in harm's way to start with, and to prevent them from being injured needlessly for wars that are not actually making us safer. We need to honor our veterans by not using them recklessly in the way that you have been used, and by providing you the long-term care and respect across the board that you deserve.
I want to ask you, too, just as a woman, what this experience is like for you. Because, of course, there's a lot of focus on Hillary Clinton as the first major party female candidate for president that we've ever had, what that would mean, and the way that she's even treated by Donald Trump, who doesn't have a great track record there when it comes to speaking about women. But even last night, interrupting every single second and kind of just yelling and haranguing her. And what are your views on that, on the way that she was treated by Donald Trump last night, but also what has your personal experience been as a woman in this field trying to run for president of the United States?
So Donald Trump, is a bully and a racist and misogynist and a hate monger and a fear monger. There's no doubt about it, and that was on full display last night in a really, really shameful way. Let me say that. On the other hand, I'm an inconvenient truth for Hillary Clinton, because her policies, while she may talk the talk, the walk hasn't been so good for women. Like Hillary Clinton and Bill led the way to dismantle the social safety net. Aid to families with dependent children was essentially dismantled by Bill with Hillary's support, and they substituted this new program, TANF, which has left over 1 million children in the lurch. It does not provide the adequate coverage that used to be available under AFDC, and nobody's been hurt harder than single parent families led by women and women who are low paid. Hillary Clinton was on the board of Walmart and was a part of this systematic abuse of workers, particularly women workers, who are poorly paid. All workers are poorly paid by Walmart, and Walmart does not provide adequate benefits. So it exemplifies a corporate-friendly economy, which unfortunately is too much of Hillary's track record in her service for the banks. Also, the Wall Street deregulation, which again was led by Bill Clinton with Hillary's support. Wall Street was deregulated, paving the way for the Wall Street meltdown, which led to the crash of 9 million jobs that were disappeared. 5 million homes were essentially stolen by the big banks. That was the outcome of Hillary and Bill's bank-friendly policies. So, Hillary's track record is not great for women by any means. And we not only need equal pay, we need equal pay at wages that will get families out of poverty. That means a $15 an hour living wage, which again is something Hillary briefly flirted with but then quickly retreated from. So yes, we do need to stand up for what women actually need in this economy. Hillary Clinton has been very busy standing up for war, for Wall Street, and for the Walmart economy. That's not the future that we deserve. We deserve better.
So those are policies, but personally, on a personal level, have you experienced sexism? Would you say in this? I'm just curious about your own personal journey. It's not the first time either that you've run as the Green Party candidate. What are the ways in which you're treated?
I would say we are dismissed. We are sort of sidelined, and we're treated as second-class citizens. Not worthy of a debate, for example, not worthy of press coverage. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton have had 35,000 and 20,000 times as much mainstream media coverage as I've had, but they're not doing thousands of times better. There is support out there, word of mouth support, which is spreading. But we are considered, is it because I'm a woman, or is it because I'm challenging corporate power? Is it because the Green Party is challenging militarism, corporatism, and imperialism? They kind of go hand in hand with sexism, so it's hard to extricate them. In the words of Martin Luther King, racism, materialism, extreme materialism, and militarism are all one and the same, and I would add sexism to that. So yes, we are a challenge to business as usual. We are proud of it. I guess I'm used to it enough that I hardly even notice, and we are just focusing. We've got our eyes on the prize. We know that the clock is ticking on our future, whether on account of sexism, racism, nuclear weapons, and the new nuclear arms race, or the climate catastrophe. Our days are numbered right now unless we stand up for a new way forward. So that really is my focus. Like the indigenous people at the Standing Rock Sioux Nation, they're not asking for small concessions. They're not asking for a little bit of discretion along the margins of policy. They're asking for an end to the abuse of their lands and their historical grave sites. They're asking for their water supply, which is the water supply for 17 million people downstream, and for the climate that we all share. And they are standing up bravely and boldly to do that. Yeah. That is what we have to do.
And then authorities are coming
right
in
now.
and arresting people and charging people like yourself, right? One other question, too, and we, again, didn't really hear about this last night at the debate, and the only real way that race was brought up was through the birther issue or birtherism. But what are your thoughts, for example, on Colin Kaepernick, the football player, and his protest that he's been waging, and whether or not we've heard from either Clinton or Trump anything adequate when it comes to police brutality and the racial aspect of it?
Yes, and in fact, what was leaked, again, another leak from the DNC, I think it came out of Nancy Pelosi's office, was advice from the DNC to their candidates. Listen nicely, pat them on the heads when Black Lives Matter campaigners come to you, but don't make concessions to them, which is really the most condescending and shameful thing to be saying, and really reflects where the Democratic Party is on this. And in fact, Hillary Clinton, remember, she and Bill were behind the omnibus crime bill of the 1990s, which opened the door to mass incarceration and this vicious racial disparities in our judicial and prison system. As Hillary was saying, that we have to bring these young African Americans to heal. So, is it any wonder that the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton is not moving forward? Yes, Donald Trump's racism is despicable, but Hillary Clinton is not showing, signs of really changing her tune here in the way that it needs to be changed. We are calling for every community to have a police review board with the power to hire and fire and to subpoena. We're calling for independent investigators so that every community has the right to investigate every death at the hands of police without requiring special dispensation from Washington, D.C. And we're calling for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission so we can actually get together at the level of communities and have an honest and open discussion about race using narratives, using music, and using art, as was done recently in Ferguson in a really compelling way, to put us on the same page so we can get past this historic legacy of the criminal institution of slavery and get on with becoming one unified community. You're not going to see that happening under Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump.
One more question here from Sarah Danielle Stevens. Says, we can't afford daycare, rent, education, homes. How can we trust you to deliver on these promises? Why should we give you our hard-earned money? Please answer this question. # Stein for the 99.
Exactly. So you can look at my track record for one. You can also see that I don't take money like the other candidates from those very interests that are raising your health care costs, imposing the corporate-friendly Obamacare on you, which is a boondoggle for insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies. I have a history of fighting that. I have a history of fighting on behalf of everyday people, of standing up to end foreclosures. I was arrested in the last campaign to try to stop foreclosures against homeowners and to try to support the blockade of the KXL pipeline. I have a track record for standing up on behalf of everyday people. That is what I do, is build coalitions. I am a part of the social movements. I am not a politician. I am a physician practicing political medicine and working with community groups to basically improve our power so that we have the right to take back this promise of democracy and to lead the way forward to the future that we deserve, with jobs on an emergency jobs program that will solve the climate emergency, that will create free higher education, health care as a human right, that will cancel student debt, that will end police violence, that will create a welcoming path to citizenship and a foreign policy based on international law and human rights. This is the agenda we need. It's time for us to reject the lesser evil, to stand up and fight for the greater good, like our lives depend on it, because they do.
One last question there. Let's say that you defied the odds, right? Just statistically as they stand now, too, and you were elected. You still, as an executive, can't get much done without Congress actually passing the legislation. And so if we had one person who is acting differently or going against the system in that position, that's not going to change the entire government, right? So how do you actually try to bring about change on that greater mass level instead of focusing so much just on the executive branch?
Well, let's put it this way. If I were elected, everything has changed, because that means that we have a surge of public engagement in order to get me into office. Unlike Barack Obama, who sent his ground troops home when he entered office, even before he entered office, and he appointed Larry Summers, the guy who created the Wall Street meltdown. He appointed him as Secretary of the Treasury. I would continue to keep people engaged. I wouldn't lay off the ground troops. I would say, okay, here's how we go forward, because now we have the numbers. And by the way, if I get elected, we also elect lots of down ballot Green candidates, not only at the state and local level, but also in Congress, where we have scores of candidates who are running for Congress. And we also unleash progressive Democrats to actually stand up for a progressive agenda. And then we do something that's never been done before. We actually have an organizer-in-chief in the White House, so that we're actually informing and empowering voters and this broad social movement for progressive change to actually be the engine of that change. So people are notified, for example, when we are voting on health care as a human right under a Medicare for all system. People get out and we flood our legislators' office because it's in the absence of our being there. It's in the absence of our instructions that they take their marching orders from the lobbyists.
So you need people to get engaged. I think right.
Exactly.
The key to any kind of real political change in the country is that you need people to be involved, and it has to start from the ground up. And in that sense, too, maybe third parties, any kind of alternative party, really needs to get itself going on those smaller levels and in smaller offices first, to start applying that pressure. We have to leave it there, but Jill, thank you so much for joining us.
And we do have over 100 people in local office. 1 out of every 3 Greens who runs locally gets elected. We have over 1,000 people who've held elected office at the local level, but you won't hear about it. This is why we need to challenge power at all levels and not give them a pass for taking us over the cliff on these endless expanding wars, the climate catastrophe that Democrats are leading the way on, as well as Republicans. We have the power. Remember, 43 million young people locked into student debt. If they get the word, they can come out and take over this election and win it for the future we deserve.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. Thanks for watching, guys, and thank you for leaving your questions and comments. We'll see you on the next stream.